Hey, this is Scott from phasingplayer.com. This is the third and final part of my interview with Matt Eklund. In it, we talk primarily about Pax Transhumanity, its themes, and its development. My buddy Mike joins in for a lot of the conversation, and we all have a good time talking about the game. So I hope you guys enjoy this third and final part of the interview. Now, if you are listening to this on SoundCloud or a podcast app, I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/phasingplayer. And if you're listening on YouTube, I also have a SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/phasingplayer. So go check both of them out, I guess, or check the other one out if you're using one. Anyway, on to the interview. Before we talk about transhumanity, let's briefly talk about Emancipation, which you are not you don't have a credit on it, but I do know that it was sort of in production at the same time, or in design, the design phase at the same time as Transhumanity, and sort of borrowed some ideas from that. What was the relationship there like between Transhumanity and Emancipation?
Now, this is relatively easy for me to answer in the scheme of things. I never played Emancipation. I believe that I submitted Transhumanity before Emancipation ever was thought of or conceived as an idea. That may not be the case. Maybe it was an idea. Maybe it was on a drawing board somewhere that I didn't know about. And I became aware of the project when notes were dropped on the Transhumanity living rules that would say from Phil saying, "Hey, I'm stealing this stuff, or I'm using all this for Pax Emancipation," or whatever. And so I never played Emancipation. I never play tested Emancipation. I have a copy. He sent me a copy. It's still in Saran wrap, but I'm certainly familiar with the product and the idea, and I know that certain mechanisms were borrowed from the Transhumanity submission and ported over to Emancipation. Now, I believe all that happened before the Ion Games partnership, but I don't honestly know much else about it.
Okay.
But certainly Transhumanity was intended to be a way to use the PAX system to explore idea development. And if Phil was looking at a game about, this deconstruction of an idea, I guess I can certainly imagine that he would take some of the stuff from that. But that's it. I mean, that's all. Honestly, that's all I know about it.
Okay. Well, so I guess getting into Transhumanity a bit. Then, when did you start development on that?
I don't know the answer. I'm going to say 4 years ago, but I do recall playing it, a incomplete, tragic version at the local game convention. That would be 3 or 4 years ago. The integrated money aspect hadn't been sorted out, and I think got sorted out at that convention. But another one of these situations where random people are willing to play a random game that you printed out. It didn't have victory conditions in the game yet. Stuff like that. But that would certainly be early on in the development of Transhumanity. And I'd always called the project Pax Transhumanity, but I simultaneously always hoped that it would get a better name, but it never did.
I know the box for a while, the box art on Board Game Geek had like a big H plus on it, and I know a lot of people that would call it like H plus. Was that like humanity, like beyond, or humanity plus, or like what was that symbol? I'm
Yeah, so the transhuman, there above and beyond any of this game universe, there's a transhuman movement or political ideology or something like that with candidates and stuff like that. And they're an interesting bunch of people. They have a magazine and things like that. And H plus is sort of this meme of humanity, but better humanity, but improved upon. I didn't like there was several images that were released on the Board Game Geek that I think were really early in development and involved space shuttles and empty boxes and stuff like that. But I didn't like the H plus on the cover, but I think I'm okay with the H plus as a descriptor of the game. But the main problem is with the name is that a lot of people equate transhumanity with post-humanity, with like the idea that we're not humans anymore and that we are, fill in the blank, programs or signals or uploads or insect mutants, whatever it is. And the game was meant to be a near future game, and so I'm not sure transhumanity is even the right title for it. It's meant to be a game about idea development that moves us in that direction. But no better title was ever put forward, and so transhumanity it became.
Cool. So it is also the first non-historical PAX game. Did it feel like you were breaking like some unwritten rule or something, like designing something that wasn't set in history or based on a lore's design, or whatever it might be, instead going to like a theoretical future?
Well, with PAX Renaissance, I thought it was inconceivable. I had restricted PAX Renaissance. Let me think. Well, my design of PAX Renaissance went from like the fall of Constantinople to Da Gama in India or something. And in the end, it ended up being like twice as long. I mean, it encompassed, instead of being, 1452 to 1492 or 1500, it became like 1492 to 1540 or something. Think about how tiny the amount of time period and space that Pax Porfiriana is relative to Renaissance. We're talking about a fairly uniform population across a 15 or 10-year period in Pax Porfiriana. And instead, in Pax Renaissance, we're zooming out. We're including a huge number of empires, explorers, artists, idea developers, 3 major religions, a million minor ones, and almost 100 years of history in some of the most exciting and insane time period in Europe, and the Middle East. And the scope of Pax Renaissance in the end of the game was impossible in my mind. It seemed impossible that we could do that. And as I mentioned, my original design was a lot more limited. But we solved it by only including the most epic and major, and interesting, for that matter, interactions and events in that time period. And so transhumanity didn't seem like that huge a challenge. Well, we'll just make it the whole world now. And then we'll make it more than the world. We'll make it space too. And why not the virtual world? And all we got to do is apply the same things we did in Renaissance, which is abstract and only focus on the biggest and most major and most important issues. And it's doable. And that's how transhumanity attempts to address those issues. Now it very understandably opens itself up to some, once again, pretty reasonable criticism that, large amounts of problems with humankind are not even addressed or are just subsumed under some other, some little humanitarian shit or another in the game. Mm-hmm. So Renaissance, I already had experience of cutting out. every artist in the Renaissance cut out of the game. 95% of the relevant towns, interesting locations, cut out of the game, right? Like we just murdered huge parts of the Renaissance to make PAX Renaissance, because we wanted to cover so much ground and so much territory and so much time period. So with PAX Transhumanity, in many ways, I was just continuing the same strategy. What is like the most important issues, and is that similar enough to another issue that I can include that in the same, the same angle or abstract victory point or what have you? It did feel like a continuation of that, covering the entire planet and low Earth orbit and the virtual world and here, there, and everywhere on the whole world. It wasn't so impossible seeming as PAX Renaissance seemed, honestly, to me.
So you were saying that you've heard some criticism about stuff that you don't really touch on, or that you sort of underplay maybe. And Mike, you had also sort of said that you felt like there were certain things that you, from your perspective, weren't getting the attention that you kind of wanted it to.
Yeah, absolutely. I answer your thoughts and questions, but by zooming so far out that I'm encompassing the entire planet for a 20-year period in the most, technologically, speeding time period that Earth's history will encounter, huge swaths of human experience had to be either eliminated entirely or just folded into sort of generic ideas or victory points in the game. I think it's honestly, I think it's a really fair criticism. But my only meaningful response is for whatever particular issue that one thinks should have been included in the game as its own meritorious idea or barrier or problem or card, there are 1,000 others of equal deserving, and when you zoom that far out, horrible sacrifices have to be made. And that's what I did.
Yeah, I just to jump in, I don't want to start this call. I don't want to start this line of questioning as like I'm the skeptic in the group. I enjoyed playing the game. I've watched the game fully through once and played the game fully through once. So I'm not anywhere near an expert. I'll say what really the thing that I keep coming back to with the game, and maybe you can just speak on this, sure. Maybe closer to like what you were thinking when you developed the theme of the game is, I think I come from, I'm certainly a futurist in a similar way. Like I am very interested in what is to come and the way that technology is. Maybe it's what's causing my lack of ability to expand my idea of the future. But I think my idea of the future comes from something like Star Trek, and I think this is a slightly different take on what the future looks like. And I think that you did a great job. I actually do like the issue cards, the advancement cards, and I think that it's fun to read them and to read the heat on them and like what those and kind of like try to like decipher what you so that's always fun. But like I guess if you could speak to sort of the how did you come up with this future where four industrialists are vying to save the world?
Right. A very fair question. So the first thing I want to mention, Mike, is that before you came on the call, I at least briefly undertook to explain the game's title, which I don't think is optimal. I honestly don't. And sort of certain futurist ideals in general, And whereas this game is supposed to be a near future technology development game, the idea of transhumanity, which many people equate with sort of distant future concepts, I was never entirely comfortable with. But honestly, we never came up with anything. We honestly never came up with anything better. So transhumanity it is, and so many of the ideas in the game are I wouldn't say have already been obviated, but there was a time in the development where we had a car. I don't remember what it was, quantum dots or something, and then all of a sudden it became a thing. Like it was like a thing that people could do and interact with. It was already commercialized, and it became irrelevant. So we threw it out. And there's a lot of ideas that are pretty great ideas that are, in my mind, they're such low-hanging fruit that they are going to happen that I did not include them in the game. So self-driving cars is like, even 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever I designed the thing, is so obvious to me that is a critically important and is going to happen. Like, this is not is it going to happen? Isn't it going to happen? It's going to happen. The value is so incredible and the payoff is so close that I didn't include it in the game because it was too obvious. The game is supposed to take place, in 2030, 2040, 2050. Self-driving cars are going to be the dominant car by that time. I would humbly predict, in my coming from my fundamental belief that I don't really understand anything that's going on. And I should mention that I did a lot of research for Pax Transhumanity, but I am not some elite futurist who knows perfectly and can look into the crystal ball and see how things are going to play out. The fact that I am currently sequestered in my home for the past 6 weeks or whatever is evidence of that. Fact. But there's also some ideas that I think are sort of generally terrible ideas that I didn't put into the game that I think are going to play out in the near future. The cards themselves are supposed to represent ideas and not products, and so it's very easy to look at Pax Transhumanity and sort of view it as well, I am a business and I am going to make products and sell them to the world. And in some ways, the game is intended to simulate that. However, the cards themselves really represent the foundations of those products, the fundamental bases upon which a million companies and livelihoods will be based on these, on whether these certain ideas are adopted or not adopted. But the ideas themselves, irrespective of the fortunes of the person or the leading people who try to figure this stuff out, these ideas are going to have a net positive impact. And I don't think that's inconsistent with history. I do generally have an optimistic view of the near future. However, the game certainly does make optimistic assumptions about the way that these ideas are going to affect humanity, but B, also about the motivations of the individual players who are playing in the game. The general concept is going to be that individuals who just care about money are just sort of fluff in the game. They're filler. They sort of fill in the space. They are going to help idea A accomplish goal B by making money at point C. And those have been almost entirely abstracted out of the game. Certainly, certain ideas may be more profitable than others, and certain ideas have growth and others don't. So it's not completely removed from gameplay, but the idea assumes, and maybe irrationally so, but assumes that the players are going to care about humanity's outcome and not just their own personal fortune. And I think that these people exist in the world, and
I certainly hope they do.
and so it is. That's the base. That's the whole basis of the game. But I'm happy. It's a weird idea. I mean, the whole thing's a weird idea. But the thing is, transhumanity is intended to explore the interactions of ideas and the truly weird way that ideas become adopted, and how certain ideas that are adopted become part of human history. In the game, the Human Progress display, trigger and nudge humanity in certain directions and in certain ways. It's entirely possible that this game should not be a near future game, and instead I should have made it a recent past game instead, and had the cards be, the internet and the
interesting
international flights and this, that, and the other thing. But whatever. I was excited about it. I've been reading a lot of Neil Stephenson and Werner Vinge and whatever. I wanted to make a game about the future, and
I think it's interesting that you even pointed it out, the sort of irony that it's called transhumanity, and in that the whole point of that would be to transcend all of sort of what you're doing in the game,
right?
Thematically, if you were to hit that emergence, so to speak,
right,
you would transcend all of that, and all of the money and all of the things would go away. But
right.
But yeah, no. So I think that's interesting. I personally really enjoy the ideas cards. Like I said already, I think that it's really fun to have them out. Decide to invest or syndicate one, and the meta of the game, talking about or not the meta, but the idea that where we're talking oh, well, now I'm doing open borders, but you did this, and that affects open borders in this way, is just a sort of a fun thought experiment each time you do something in the game. So
yeah, the game got I think weirder when I finally accepted that I truly did want social movements and political ideas to be in the game. And when I wanted the idea cards to not be products, period. I didn't want this to be a product development game. I wanted it to be an idea development game. The idea that you're affecting humanity, and that ideas are fundamentally a part of us. That's a weird thing to think about. But the fact that the internet exists changes every human being on the planet's life. It fundamentally changes how everyone lives their life. And it becomes integrated into who we are. No, we are not transcending our meat puppet bodies or whatever yet. But that doesn't mean that these technological ideas are not becoming a fundamental part of who we are. And in fact, the original card set that I sent to Phil, on each end of the card had a little DNA thing, and so the idea of the display, you would be building this DNA splice of all the different, disciplines in the game, the technological disciplines in the game, and they were all cleverly lined up to match the Gattaca thing. So A is assembly, it's the orange one. It's so Gattaca, style. They all start group dynamics or computing. They all match that thing. So you'd be encoding what human progress and what humanity looks like 30 years from now, because all of this is accelerating, and it's accelerating whether I say it's accelerating. It's independently, objectively accelerating, as it has been since the Renaissance. And I don't personally have control over that. However, I think that human beings should be more aware of how integrated these ideas are, how important they are, how fundamentally a part of us that they are, as well as the fact that that is going to continue to accelerate. It's going to get faster and faster, and the types of things that are going to happen over the lifespan of a particular individual is going to become far greater than they were a generation ago, and an order of magnitude or more beyond the generation before that. And I hope one of the ideas of the game was to get people to think about these things are coming. Like, there are idea cards in Pax Transhumanity which were totally not exascale computing and things like that were totally nuts 3 years ago, and now they're working on, like, they're gonna happen. Like, it's a matter of time. It's not a matter of a long distance time, it's a matter of a short distance time. And I think we need to I think humanity would be better off if we started to accept and screen these ideas and recognize that these ideas are going to be fundamentally changing our daily lives as well as our collective lives.
Yeah, I think we still are in the. I like the idea of you saying that it's like this part of this DNA of humanity, because I think we are, something like the internet. We are still people are still slow to accept, governments are slow to accept the fact that the internet is this thing that is not just a product that some people enjoy. It's affecting the lives of every person on the planet, and their lives are intertwined with it,
right,
forever. Like, we can't get away from it. So
right.
So yeah, I think it's interesting that's the way you were going. I like that. So
that was the idea. It's painful. I mean, it's actually painful to think of all the things that were abstracted out of Pax Transhumanity, all of the exciting things that are going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that Pax Transhumanity doesn't even vaguely touch on. But I do hope that people can play this game and maybe just get a better. It's not an educational game. It's not teaching anything. It's not a preachy game, but just get a better idea of, like, how these things come about, how we don't know what's going to come out. We have a vague idea. Hey, there's a bunch of stuff that's sort of on the horizon. Which of these ideas is going to become part of humanity, right? There was a time when the radio was just sort of this vague, kooky thing that nobody really understood and whatever. Like, is that going to become part of what we know? I don't know.
Right.
So the game starts from the fundamental. It really does. I really tried to start from the fundamental basis that I have no clue how this is going to play out. Like, I have no idea how this is going to play out. There's going to be a bunch of cards out there. Some of those cards are going to be viable. Some of those cards are going to interact with others and make them viable. And some of these cards are going to be a total waste upon humanity and be lost in the annals of history and never be thought of again. And I'm not an expert. I don't know what's going to be what, but the players can explore that space. That was the idea of Pax Transhumanity, for better or worse.
In regards to, like, the players' identities, you have each player has, like, a name listed there: blogger, colonel, citizen, and doctor. What was the impetus behind putting those on the player, like, placards versus keeping it a little more abstract? Because it seems very direct to say, like, you are a blogger, right?
That one in particular.
That is an excellent question. When I submitted the game, it did not include names for the individual players. It also had different colors, but colors were chosen due to color blindness issues, and player names were chosen due to, I don't know the answer.
Interesting. So you did not influence that decision at all. It just suddenly it was on there.
That is correct. I had no input at all as to who was named citizen and why, but certainly if they had thrown around citizenry powers or colonelry powers, I would have probably had something to say about that. But
Sure.
if they're just going to name the players, I don't really care. Colonel Green, Bill Mustard, whatever, in the observatory.
Sure. So yeah, because that was something that when we first played the game, and I think you watched us play that one, Mike, or maybe you watched us play the second time or something. But anyway, we sat down and just kind of discussed the theme of the game a bit, and it was a hang up for some of us of like, what does it mean I'm a blogger? Like, what does this mean? I'm running like a super successful blog and I have billions of dollars because of that. I think some of us suggested, like, I think it was Jimmy, Mike. I think Jimmy said you should just take a piece of tape and put it over those names, and it would like make the theme kind of connect harder if I could in my head put together who I represent instead of the game saying I am a citizen, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly understand that point of view. I don't think it's that big a deal. The only thing that distinguishes the players when they start the game, other than turn order and whatever starting money that's based on the turn order, is the particular patent that they start with.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe easier to imagine that some sort of social media mogul might have more patents in the computing realm or something, and maybe that's what motivated that. But it honestly, it doesn't matter to me. This was not intended to be a personal game about you. It's a game about trying to solve human problems and direct human history towards whatever your agenda is.
Now, and I have a question, just a thought in my head is, if these players are trying to advance human history, or advance humanity towards this transcendence or whatever it ends up, if that's
Sure.
not the right word. Why keep it within the realm of business, and not allow for, I mean, not that you can, not that even that's possible in the gameplay way of the way the game plays, but it's something to me is like interesting that they have patents and they keep patents and they sell patents, and it's like this would move faster if we just gave it to everybody. But then you turn into this philanthropist, right? You just turn into this selfless billionaire, which maybe just unrealistic at this point.
I guess that's an interesting question, right? Because there's nothing wrong with philanthropy. Philanthropy, certainly on the giga scale, can really create some interesting innovation and things like that. But I don't think that that's where the vast majority of innovation is occurring. Maybe on the application side or something like that. Most ideas that are improving human circumstances have a huge supporting structure that comes from the economy, and the economy exists because people are making money at the different levels at which they're applying these things. The general idea that these ideas needed to be viable is a sort of a commercial based viewpoint. The idea that these ideas need to be self-supportive, and that you're not going to be able to just expect some government somewhere to be able to maintain these ideas on their own or innovate these ideas on their own. But that said, I included the concept of utilities in the game, where I wanted ways for public infrastructure to be able to influence and dramatically affect the way that ideas are developed. And you'll find that through the subsidy mechanic, the subsidy mechanic in the game. But the reality is, who came up with it, or who spent the money to kick off the whole thing is almost irrelevant in the annals of history. The question is the idea self-supportive? Is the idea such a good one that we're going to adopt it and make it part of us.
I certainly agree that a lot of innovation does come from that, and I do think, and I think that that's fine. I don't, that part of it isn't even necessarily my question. I guess the question is, where's that next step, right? If we're going to develop, God, I don't know, I have to come up with, whatever it is, but if we're going to develop X thing then needs to enter the zeitgeist of humanity. And if you look at something like the internet, right, at that point it was developed partially by the government,
right,
and then accelerated by private private industry after that. So I guess the point that I'm getting to is that when I play the game, I feel like I feel like I'm trying to make myself. I'm trying to win, right? I'm trying to win by making the best thing.
Sure.
And it feels a little bit of a disconnect with I'm trying to advance humanity to this like new realm. And again, it's being pedantic. I mean, I think me personally, I get into theme quite a bit, and sometimes when the theme doesn't jive in my head, it's like it's bothersome when really it's it's a game. So what do you think?
What, you don't want to win at life, Mike? I mean, really, come on, aren't we all out to win?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good. I think that's a fair criticism, but B, a really good point. And there's gonna be a divergence in the game. So there's some ideas in the game, and I think I mentioned before, there's some ideas in the game that really aren't commercially, like, how are you supposed to make a product out of universal basic income? Like, I mean, there's social movements and social ideas in the game that were included, and they do break from the fundamental sort of product-based corporate idea development that many of the other parts of the game subsume. All I can say is I included those ideas. I included those ideas to try to let people know that, hey, there's broad appeal to these ideas. Now, some of them are going to include depressions and things like that. But hey, man, if you need a green point right now, like, who cares about money in the? I mean, honestly, who cares about money in the game? These points are points, right? So, and I think I would propose, but once again, I do this tentatively with the understanding I don't know anything. That certain extreme social measures are going to, certain social structures are going to have to be modified or put into place to buffer against purely corporate profit-based interest. And the game attempts to simulate this by both including social ideas on the cards and scoring points with those ideas, but also providing a separate means of which to commercialize cards or to do work. Whether maybe it's research, maybe it's not even commercializing an idea, maybe it's just getting new ideas out there through the utilities, through the public, means.
Yeah, I think that connects to me. And I'm thinking about it now, and Scott mentioned the names on the cards, and I think that's where the disconnect comes from me, because and tell me if this is something, and this will be the last thing I question you on it, but maybe this is something you thought about, is like you have these like unfettered billionaires almost as some of the characters, and then what, like, if the other character, almost when I saw the Colonel, I thought about it, it's this like restricted bureaucratic government character who has his own issues. He has some benefits of being the government, but has his own negatives because of that. I guess that's where it came from, right? I see these names on it, and I go, okay, well then who are these people? And maybe that's just where the disconnect comes for me. But
yeah, I don't have much to say about the Colonel or any specific character, as I mentioned, but I will say that Unfettered is a tricky word to throw around in Pax Transhumanity, which I think has one of the tightest, most restrictive financial systems of any of the PAX games. You are extremely fettered. You cannot throw money at bad ideas. Like, you just can't. Like,
that's an interesting segue too. I think I was going to say too that the way that, if you can talk about how you came up with it, the way that you fundraise is interesting. It's different.
I have attempted to put a concept called integrated money. So the idea that money represents flows of money rather than actual piles of money, into every Lords and PAX game design since the beginning of time. I've tried to get this concept to work, and originally the original PAX Transhumanity, like original, like no victory conditions, no one really knows what's going on, but the idea of disciplines and idea development is in play. Every player would have these cubes every turn, and you would place them in different places, sort of like a worker placement game, and they would affect that every single turn. They'd sort of reset every single turn. But what I didn't like was that it didn't simulate the advantages of liquidity. It didn't simulate the advantages of not being invested in particular ideas and being able to explore your options. And so adding the idea that spending an action will generate the sort of virtual money based on how many things you're not doing, I think was critical and very early on part of PAX Transhumanity's development. And I love the financial system in Transhumanity. I think it's great. I think when a player takes an action to undo things they've done previously, this can be viewed as cruel or counterproductive. It flies in the face of everything a Euro game is ever about, right? Like the idea that you'd ever bid on a card and then have to spend time to unbid on a card is nonsense. But the game space is so weird, and it creates its own natural balancing mechanism. There's a lot of advantages to using it. I love that system.
Yeah, I do too.
And I hope to use it more in the future. I honestly, of all the, I'm not a mechanics guy. I mean, I've never come up with a great game mechanic ever, but this might be, if you had to say which one's the best one you came up with, this would be the one.
I don't know if you came up with flipping the little plane upside down in Kriegbot to make it a helicopter.
That may not have been me. Honestly, that could just as easily have been Phil. I don't. That sounds like a Phil idea to me. It does. Sounds like an engineer. Sounds like an aeronautical engineer or whatever, mechanical engineer, whatever.
Sure. Well, but yes, the I think the finance, the wealth system in Transhumanity is great. It also, not only does it create really interesting kind of game states, because like you said, you'll do something to sink a lot of your stuff from capital to wealth or wealth to debt, and then you say, I can't go forward living with all this debt. I need to spend some time now, undoing the thing that I just did. It's like I gained a small benefit and then had to take a couple steps backwards to kind of catch up with myself. But it's also super elegant. Like it means you don't end up with this messy stack of money. You don't end up with this like, okay, hold on, I gotta count how many coins do I have in this stack again? Or I have a big mess of things here. Like, it's very clean and easy to see other players' stuff. I think it works on multiple levels. So yeah, kudos to you for coming up with that. It's quite nice.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and the debt leveraging is pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah, I think what I was gonna say is I really like the fact that you can't get, if you get into debt, it's harder to get out of that than it is to stay above debt into the wealth capital cycle. I thought that was interesting, that like if you end up with all your cubes in debt, it's like, oh boy.
Yeah. So something I tell people a lot the first time we play is, do not let all of your cubes end up in debt, because then you're going to spend several turns like struggling.
Yeah, my advice is a little bit of debt is fine. And that's how it is in the real world. It's really weird. I don't know why, but a little bit of debt is fine. But a lot of debt is bad.
Yeah. Well, if
Yeah.
you have a little bit of stuff in debt, it means your money's doing something, presumably.
Right.
And if your
Right.
money's just sitting there not doing anything, then why do you have it, right? You should have a bit of debt because that means you're doing something.
That Chris Peters, one of our playtesters, has pointed out numerous times that if you have a bunch of cubes on your finance board, you are losing the game. If you are rich, you are losing this game. Right now, you are losing this game. You cannot be rich in this game. You've got to be controlled poor.
Yes, very much. You should have enough cubes on your finance board to react to stuff going around, but have your cubes out there as syndication or as employees or whatever. Heat. Which actually I'm curious about the the heat system in the game. How when you syndicate an idea, you also have to manage sort of what comes along with the idea you're getting into. And for me, that the theme of heat works. It works quite well, and like that there's like an issue. Like what was it? The white ones are the ones you have to deal with, and the black ones are optional. That there's some issue, like unavoidable problem that's going to come up if you start to meddle with this idea. But then there's also another likely thing that'll come up, a likely problem that you don't have to deal with to get this idea functional, but maybe you should. Like how did you come to kind of put that together, like to make that work?
So the idea that some of these near future ideas are going to have a certain social cost, like there's going to be a certain resistance to many of these, sometimes for perfectly good reasons, was fairly obvious early on in the game. I wanted there to be a cost, and costs in this game, because it's already integrated money, I knew it was going to involve inputting cubes into play that would be retrieved through game mechanisms, but because they're not on your finance board, they're not money anymore. Budgetary restrictions and things like that. I also, from very early on, wanted the ability of that heat to permanently affix itself to the human progress splay, as what the game calls future shock, which is to allow players themselves to have slightly different sort of, using the DNA analogy earlier, have a slightly different DNA than other players. And so that they could be the riskier, edgier sorts that gain more pairings that allow them to leverage new ideas, while other players miss the boat on that, won't have access to that, but simultaneously don't have cubes that are sort of lost to the void. I also wanted, being a fan of Werner Vinge, the idea of this sudden singularity game end to be in the game. That went through a lot of different iterations, but I wanted there to be a way for victory points in the traditional sense not to matter, like not to our human ails to be totally irrelevant if we achieve some hyper acceleration of technological development. And so Future Shock was the obvious choice for victory in those circumstances. Whoever pushed us to the limit, whoever was brave enough to not listen to the naysayers and just go get this done, would be the winners of the game. However, the distinction between black and white heat was actually not my invention. Phil was submitted a game that only included white heat, and it also included impacts for security threats and liberty threats, the sort of general thing that the nuclear exchanges icons became in the game later. He's the one who translated those impacts into this idea of, hey, you can put safeguards on certain technologies or not in others, and added black heat as a concept to the game, which I think was brilliant. It was a really great suggestion. And it really worked out. But the original design of the game, the one that I submitted however many years ago, did not include the two colors of heat. And the largest change to the game, other than adding secret agendas, which was a rather late in the development and the Tycoon victory, for that matter, to try to balance certain game end circumstances. Those are the only real substantial changes that were made. But I really love the black heat mechanic. I had tried to simulate dangerous ideas using sort of impacts that were negative, impacts like the nuclear exchange icon that would affect all players and things like that. But how much cooler is it that black heat can become part of our human progress, and the danger of humanity's survival can be evaluated by just looking at our DNA and seeing how many bad ideas did we put into place without safeguards? How many dangerous ideas did we put into play without safeguards? This is great. I think it's great. Absolutely great.
Yeah, like if we, I think, what is it? Open Borders has, I think, terrorism as black heat. Like we instituted these open borders measures, and we didn't really consider, like the real danger of that could come up.
Yeah, it isn't about considering. It's about investing in the things to actually solve those issues, right? I mean, that's all money. All the heat cubes require is money. I say all you need is money. Money is everything. Money is a huge part of transhumanity, and every cube is incredibly valuable. And yet, those safeguards are going to have value to the player, and they're going to have value to everybody. And so I think it's pretty similar to actual humanity, where there's going to be ideas that we adopt slowly, and ideas that we adopt quickly, and ideas that we adopt based on certain disasters or events that take place. That's why I think, I hesitate to segue into current events or whatever, but something like COVID-19, while a horrifically tragic individual event, and for numerous people is absolutely an atrocity, is in the scheme of human progress probably a good thing. We need the experience. We need the opportunity to test some of our social dynamics, our technological innovations, our ability to repurpose resources, our ability to restructure the way that we operate our societies to practice in response to this, fairly natural in the scheme of things epidemic, when we're going to be combating very unnatural bioterrorism and things like that in the coming decades.
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully, we learn from these sorts of atrocities and these sorts of terrible natural events in some capacity, right? So I understand that. And then in regards to you mentioned Phil's contribution to the game in terms of Black Heat. He also did the footnotes for the game. Is that right? He put those together?
Yeah, he did. I don't know. I'd put footnotes in the rules that I'd submitted, and some of those survived in various degrees. Things that described what certain things meant. So, what's first world, what's developing world, and things like that. Some of those are for me, but a lot of the footnotes were Phil Eklund specials.
Okay, sure. And I don't want to get into the rabbit hole that is Phil Eklund footnotes. But like, are those things you sign off on, or did you see them before they went through, or is it ultimately his decision and so he just put them in and that was that?
No, I got to see them and I got to sound off on them. However, after seeing them and sounding off on them, I did require him to put in a footnote 0, which said, "Hey, these aren't the designer's thoughts." So if I'm pretty sure if you look at the first page of the rules or something, it'll say like, these are Phil Eklund's thoughts on this whole thing. And there's no universe where I will say I agree with all of his footnotes or something like that. But the game, on a fundamental level, I think the game speaks for itself, and I don't think that the game universe is really dramatically harmed by Phil Eklund's philosophies or thoughts about the universe. Mm-hmm. Or waxing poetic in his footnotes. I don't. It creates conversations that will help people evaluate their own decisions and their own thoughts on these things. I don't think it's a super negative, but were there footnotes that didn't make the cut? I'm pretty sure there were. I think there were a couple. I think there were a couple I vetoed. I don't remember offhand, but
sure,
some of them are not entirely in line with the with my goals in designing the game. But I think the game speaks for itself.
Sure. Yeah, I think you certainly don't need to read the footnotes to understand the game, and I agree that the game stands on its own in that regard.
I just want to emphasize that I don't think it's a negative position. I mean, I don't think it's heartless for a game designer to include certain really zoomed out ideas at the absence of others. Like there's so many like good ideas in the world and good causes and real harms that technology and ideas can solve that are not even slightly broached or addressed in Transhumanity. And I certainly hope that people who play the game will recognize the absurd challenge it is to try to get. I got 25 chits in the game. I was told it's 5x5. You get 25 or whatever it is. Like, what an absurd challenge it is to try to hone that down to only the biggest and most important from your own biased viewpoint as a game designer. It's a pretty intense challenge. So I hope people will give it a little bit of a break from that standpoint.
Wow. So you were like given the mandate of you only get 25 chits?
Yeah. I think that once again, my memory on these things isn't perfect. Could I have petitioned for more, come hell or high water? Probably. But I knew I wanted chits to actually be able to represent the costs in the columns because the board wasn't going to be included in the game. And the cards were going to be splaying differently and flowing top down in a way that the PAX games hadn't done previously. And so that took up six of my problems right there. Numerous other problems and numerous other idea cards and tons of other stuff got left by the wayside in the wreckage of developing and finally publishing Transhumanity. And it's a very fair criticism of the game that it's a very abstract exercise, certainly compared to the other PAX games, but it's done with a good intent. Let's say that.
Do you have a favorite idea card in the game? Is there something in there that you're like, man, I want to know what happens when this thing in real life is invested into?
I think I always liked the card Sangra Sites. I mean, the card that gets the most talk about and whenever it comes up or whatever is Open Source Sexuality, which I think is kind of a fairly blasé card in the scheme of things. But Sangra Sites, the idea that we can inject ourselves with nano robots to give us constant medical analysis. I just don't see how that could be I mean, of course there's ways for it to be negative, but you think of people with pacemakers now, you've got devices, even theoretically hackable devices inside our hearts. Is it really such a mass horrible idea to have tiny little robots roaming our bloodstream, cleaning stuff up, figuring stuff up, sounding alarms and doing what have you? And I always liked, I don't know, I like that card name. I don't remember what inspired it, but that's one of my favorite cards in the game.
Cool. So a name that sticks out to me, I think, because it just sounds very grand, is Enslaved God. Like we were talking earlier about kind of, RPGs and tabletop games and kind of the big stories. And I think Enslaved God is like, this is a dramatic card, like next to, what is it, like Spy Dust and Universal Basic Income and all this stuff. And then Enslaved God has like a big blue man on it. And the heat is like, it escapes or something. Where did that come from?
Well, the game originally included several super technologies, which actually required 3 disciplines in a row. to accomplish. Those were folded into the actual game, just with an epic moniker that would give nuclear exchange and cause other things. I forget what the super tech was for computing, but it got renamed to Enslaved God. But the basic idea of the card is that we are going to have the ability in the near future of creating a creator. So creating an artificial intelligence that can create and test and improve artificial intelligences. And when you have that sort of auto evolution that can operate on a time scale that we can't even conceive, like even we blink and things change in this universe, and that the speed of calculations that these things are running on, you can imagine a circumstance where humans harness sort of a super AI, a meta AI, an AI that can build AIs. And the one thing we would never want to give such a thing is autonomy, right?
Sure.
And if we somehow were able to eliminate its ability to auto-evolve autonomy, if you could put certain safeguards in, or, I say safeguards, prison walls, or whatever you want to call them, into place, that you might be able to have a sort of, super powerful, super knowledgeable computer program that simultaneously has no ability to conceive or want or creatively achieve on its own, or have individual freedoms or liberty. And that's the idea. And that such a thing might be somewhat unique. Like the first one in the world might be the only one in the world. Like it's not obvious why you'd want two of these things, depending on how your society is structured. Now, in reality, AI technology is it's an arms race. I mean, in the future, there's going to be AIs made by different creators, battling it out over different platforms and things like that. And there's going to be AIs spreading disinformation, and AIs cleaning up disinformation, and AIs doing this, that, and the other thing. But maybe it doesn't play out that way. I don't know. I mean, that would be my guess how it plays out. So maybe it doesn't play out that way. Maybe it plays out that there's one AI and then we don't need another AI, and that AI does all the AIing for the whole world.
Yeah, maybe the AI is a really cool guy and just you want to crack a beer with him.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, the whole concept of cool and the concept of guy, everything gets real blurry out there. And I gotta say, man, this was not, from that perspective, this was another reason that this was a hard game to make, man, because certain things lack meaning at the end of this rainbow.
Sure.
And
sure.
I don't know. I took my shot, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I think you did a great job. I like Transhumanity a whole lot. I've played it. I've been meaning to get to the solitaire game, and to try that out. But it's certainly probably the first PAX title I'll grab for right now. If that's the sort of system I'm in the mood for. And yeah,
I should mention, you mentioned the solitaire game. I had nothing to do with the solitaire game. I'm not a solitaire player. I've had nothing to do with any solitaire game version of any game that has my name on it since the beginning of time. Phil made Pax Porfiriana into a solitaire game, which I told him was an impossible task, and yet he did an awesome job with. And Yoon Manker did the Pax Transhumanity one, once again with no input for me, and somehow succeeded. And I don't know how he did it, but it doesn't seem achievable to me. But I just want to throw that out there. I can't take any credit for any solitaire version of any of these.
Okay, well, I'll be sure to edit this all out, and then I'll play it and blame you when it's not any good.
There you go. Throw off a shout.
Yeah. No, I think that's about that's about it, because Transhumanity is the most recent game you put out. Came out last year, 2019. And yeah, I'm interested certainly to see what you're working on next. Like I said, I'm sort of at a point with a lot of the titles that come out of Sierra Madre that I'm much more interested if your name is on the box. I think you're a great designer. I think you're putting out some really interesting stuff over the years. Being that it's not your full-time job, I understand you're not putting out stuff every year or anything, but it's clear, I think, that you put a lot of work into the titles you do, end up releasing, and I appreciate all the work you put into them, from your Kriegbots and your artifacts to Transhumanity and work you did on Renaissance. Yeah, I told some people I was going to be interviewing you, and if they had any questions, I wanted to throw your way. And I think you've sort of naturally answered a lot of them before I even had the chance to ask. But one that several people said was, when are you going to make more games? Because I think you've got some fans out there that want to see you, keep producing stuff.
Well, thank you, Scott. Those are very kind words. I certainly appreciate I appreciate this the support and the opportunity to have this conversation, which is not one I've ever had. So
yeah, thank you for sitting down for what's going to be like 3 hours now and talking with me.
Perfect. Well, you take care of yourself. Hey, it was very nice to meet you, Mike.
Yeah, great to meet you too. And I tell you one thing, I'm very excited to play Kriegbot at some point when this thing is over. So so that is what I'm looking forward to.
I'm psyched. I'm glad. I think that's one of my favorites.
I'm almost done with the tabletop simulator module for it. So
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's super great. It's so weird to hear even people say the word Kriegbot. Like
Scott
really
explained it to me after he showed me Transhumanity, and I was like, well, that sounds like a game I really want to play. I was like, this is very exciting.
There you go. Well, someday I'm going to make the hybrid Transhumanity Kriegbot crossover simulation.
Can't wait. And, when the singularity happens, that's when the Kriegbot starts.
That's right. Perfect.
Yeah, Phil loves, your Biogenesis feeds into Megafauna, feeds into Origins, feeds into High Frontier. We need Kriegbot 2nd edition, and then rules to go from Transhumanity to Kriegbot and bring your Transhumanity game over into that world.
That is not bad. At the end of one of the nuclear exchanges.
At the start of your Kriegbot game, modify the map in this way.
Record. Perfect.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt.
All right, it's good talking to you guys.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Stay healthy, and I'll talk to you again. Okay, well, that's gonna wrap up this interview with Matt Eklund. I had a great time talking to him. Matt is a really nice guy, and I love his games, as I said toward the end there. I hope that this inspires you guys to go check out the stuff that he's done, including but not limited to Pax Transhumanity. If you guys enjoyed this, subscribe to whatever channel you're listening to this on, YouTube or SoundCloud. And if you really enjoyed this, or any of the other content that I've made for Phasing Player, consider a donation. Go to phasingplayer.com/donate. There are a handful of options there for one-time donations or recurring. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video or the next interview, and I hope you also all stay safe and healthy.